Metro on 1019 at WDET. I'm Cary Junior II. Detroit has changed a lot in the last 2 decades. There's more investment in the downtown and midtown areas. There are more people milling about the city. The parks and public areas have improved. Stephen McGee witnessed those changes up close. The photographer and award-winning filmmaker came to Detroit decades ago and began photographing the city for the Detroit Free Press. He recently aggregated a lot of that work into a documentary called Resurgo. In it, he focuses his lens on crumbling infrastructure, the new investments injected into the area, and the people who never left. Who gets credit for all these changes? And how can the investments in Detroit be more inclusive of those that have always been here? These are some of the questions that McGee's documentary Resurgo asks. It will be playing at the Imagine Theater tomorrow in Royal Oak at 7 p.m. To discuss it now, we have Stephen here with us. Stephen, welcome back to the Metro.
Oh, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
So I want to first ask about the title itself, Resurgo. It's shortened from Resurgence, but not entirely. Where did it come from?
Yeah, I was on Belle Isle, I think probably about 2015, and there's a specific bridge that has our city slogan on there. I'm horrible at Latin, and I can't ever pronounce it correctly, but one of those words is resurget, and it means it shall rise. And we had 3 home births. This is related, believe me. We had 3 home births, and when you have a home birth, you have to name your child, but you don't really have a deadline to name that child. It took us about 30 days to name each one of our children.
After they were born?
After they were born, okay. Yeah, because there's no hospital. So naming a 20-year film was equally as challenging.
I see. And
being on this bridge in Belle Isle, and seeing this word, the idea of conjugating it to the first person came to me. And so Resurgo is just I rise again, which, in an era where everyone's trying to define Detroit, I felt like it was just an internal struggle that I myself was looking through.
A first-person perspective. Interesting. You began documenting Detroit in the 2000s, which is around the time you moved here and began your work as a photographer at the Free Press. The city has been going through a lot of hard times with people leaving, with high crime rates. When you were covering Detroit and its suburbs, what were some of the things that you heard people say about the city who had never been here?
Yeah, I mean, when I moved to Detroit in 2005, even bringing the idea of leaving California for Detroit, people would literally step backwards and say, like, that's like literally the worst idea. And especially specifically as a filmmaker, it was against any national trend that was going on. And especially, leaving the area where Hollywood had its impact for Detroit to become a filmmaker was definitely against status quo. But that, experience just made me want to get to know the city more. I had traveled the world working for humanitarian groups in countries that had some of humanity's worst ruins, as well as seeing some of the biggest ruins around the world, like the Acropolis and the Parthenon. And so when I arrived in Detroit and seeing all the ruins around our city, I realized that this was larger than a zip code narrative. It kind of actually drew me into the city more to look at those buildings and see where our country was. And now leading up to our 250th anniversary, next year, I think this film kind of is specifically and incredibly timed.
This film, its timeline is kind of its origins when you moved here initially, all the way up till today, and the change of the city itself. You then just outlined the first impact you had when you moved to the city, the ruins, and you said you wanted to see what it means for our country itself. What did you find coming to Detroit, seeing these ruins, photographing these ruins, I imagine, too?
Oh, yeah.
What did you find?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lack of understanding in my own life, kind of what our country had been through for the previous 60 years. And seeing buildings around the world that tourists go to, like the Colosseum in Rome, coming into Detroit and seeing Old Tiger Stadium or seeing the train station or seeing the Packard plant, I felt that same feeling of like some type of cold stone, this monolith, this idea with no lights on. And I was like, this is not just because of a city that failed. This was, ultimately because our country stopped making things, something pulled out. And so diving into that. But every time I was in the building, I recognized that this was not the people that I was seeing and meeting on a daily basis at Avalon Bakery or, Goodwill's or all these beautiful businesses that have since moved on. But, and so there was two parts to it, right? There was getting to know the buildings and the infrastructure in a city, and then getting to know the people. And that's really where this documentary took shape.
How did your perspective from getting to know the people, how did that compare to what people say about the city and the people who live here?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think anybody who makes snap judgments, it's easier to see those online these days, right?
Right.
But in 2006, it was person to person, and so if I'm talking to somebody outside of the city about Detroit and they're like, oh, wow, it sucks. You're like, well, actually, I had this really beautiful experience with somebody on the east side. Like, that's an instant connection. And having those every single day, it wasn't something that I was walking into thinking I was going to spend the next 20 years doing, but my own inclination to, live out my faith, to show love through whatever I can bring to the table, to raise my camera to people's lives who invited me into their lives. A story unfolded, and it was, a collection of working for all the nonprofit groups, working for all the foundations, literally working for every billionaire here, that this collection of a shared story began to emerge, that all you need to do is have an open heart and an open ear, and that idea of snap judgment just dissolves on its own. And so people started telling me things, and I was like, oh, well, that person just talked about Black Bottom and Paradise Valley. And 10 years later, someone else said something. I'm like, those two connections actually shows a beautiful lens on a way that we can approach this or that, or how this other city could go through something and move on from there. And so, these general massive topics that if I was just to specifically only spend a couple days working on, my film really gets into depth of just the human experience we all share.
I want to highlight some of the folks that you've interacted with from the city of Detroit that are in your film. As you've seen, there's a lot of people, as you said already, residents who have stayed here, who've lived here all their lives, and who love this city. Here's the voice of Lauren Hood speaking about that in your film.
I think there's this assumption that if you are a Black person in Detroit, you are here because you have to be, that we somehow got left behind.
There are people in the city who never left, people who have worked for Detroit and the betterment of Detroit for their entire lives.
How do you square that? In that moment, Lauren talks about people think that people who are here couldn't go anywhere else, as if they were left behind. In your film, why did you find it important to highlight that particular quote from her?
I mean, Lauren is an incredible woman. And she's one of those people that you don't know you're about to meet a global voice until you meet her. And I didn't know anything about her before our conversation. And just her opening up, just these conversations, that was done during, or probably right after the 2020 marches in Detroit. And, the freedom inside of each one of my interviews is that I don't come prepared. We just go anywhere, anywhere that the subject wants to go, or anywhere that we just mutually get together. And the idea of a revelation we both share are usually those golden nuggets that I kind of, I grow as a human. And because of that, I hope people through my films grow as well. That specific comment to me kind of meant, there's a lot of years that I try and get this film to. When I think, in fundraising for a film, everyone's like, who's your target market? And I never have that answer. Because I'm like, there's just an openness, because I think anybody can start, you start your day, and as soon as you're done with my film, I think you've hopefully changed into or grown into somebody further equipped to understand the city of Detroit. And that comment, I think, really reaches across a couple aisles to say, no, people chose to stay here. And in that moment, that sets up a lot of the conversations in my film. Does that answer that question? I'm not trying to really go around it, but I'm just
I mean, I'm really wanting to understand just kind of your creative choice and what voices you choose to highlight and center in the film, essentially, is kind of the broader question.
Yeah, I feel like this could have been a 10-hour series. Like,
Sure.
there are so many conversations. And in Resurgo, in this film, you know, it tries to honestly say everything. I mean, it's this huge collection of voices that create this portrait of our city. And having her define that people chose to say and did not leave is on the other side of this idea of white flight, which is still the super vague topic of history that I try and get into, you know, where essentially 2 million people chose to leave. You know, it's like, well, if you're choosing to leave, well, we're choosing to stay. And that's, to me, voices like hers and Marsha Music and Wajid and Rospit and Fame and Selfie, all these voices are the foundation that I think the investments that have come in the past 10 years stand on. Like, without the people who are choosing to support their block clubs, people who are choosing to support their local businesses that rarely made the headlines, without those people, I think you can just throw $1 billion at anything and it might not work. But the culture of Detroit is what I'm trying to show in this film.
You're listening to The Metro on 101.9. I'm Cary Junior II. I'm speaking with Steve McGee about his documentary, Resurgo. And we're going to take a quick break right now. And when we come back, we'll continue discussing the film. To the Metro on the 101.9 at WDET. I'm Cary Junior II, and we're talking about the documentary Resurgo, which is about how Detroit changed over the last 20 years. My guest is filmmaker Stephen McGee. We were just talking, Stephen, about the characters that you choose to include in this conversation and in this film. And I wanted to know more from your perspective why it is you said all the investments that are coming in the city now are built on the foundation of the people who have been here for a long time. And for your film, I'm wondering, not just this film, but we've said during the break, or you said during the break, that you have plans to do more films. You've got so much tape from covering the city over the last 2 decades. What are the essential characters, what are the essential storylines that you believe ought to be told about what's happened in that time?
Yeah, and so I think that's a great question because, you know, when I was working for the Free Press, I got a glimpse into the city. I left the Free Press. I did freelance. I was on the streets every single day, getting to know the people. I then started working for all the major media outlets who wanted the film, who wanted the content that was about, you know, the city and how far it had fallen. And every one of those, you know, iterations and generations of content equipped me to figure out what stories were 1 or 2 years, you know, in our general timeline of the past 120, and specifically in the past 20 that I did, and which comments from people showed a broader narrative arc that went beyond a specific moment in time. And so I think that there are lessons in the city, specifically in the people, that our country needs right now, specifically on the West Coast. We don't need to get into that right now, but you know, I feel like there's these evolutions of and moments of disinvestment happening across major cities across the U.S. right now in the same way that Detroit had in 1950 and 1960, which I get into in my film. And the lessons of the people who were here during the time when so many things were taken away, from the opera houses to the schools to the hospitals to, you know, not even being able to call 911, just all these moments that we've kind of I've had. The lessons of those communities that were still rising up and still successful, to me, is the beautiful part of our country.
What are the specific lessons that you took from the people who are here?
I would love to say those specific lessons, but I feel like in my film, my films are always a moment where whatever you bring to the table, hopefully whatever you leave is stronger.
You don't want to make the interpretation for people.
I don't want to make the interpretation for people. You know, there's lessons of love and community and togetherness, but anytime I put words to that, it feels less than where I'm like, hey, fame, 313 Avenue of Fashion, like Livernois, like that means something. But also if I hit these like 4 other moments in history, Livernois Avenue of Fashion means a lot more. And so like, I think, there's just, the city has insane amount of lessons. I mean, even just how our foundations have supported Detroit. I've worked a lot with the Kresge Foundation and the Knight Foundation, but just even thinking that Kresge was a billionaire 100 years ago, and that investment from 100 years ago helped us through the financial crisis. Imagine what if billionaires and millionaires gave that support to their local communities now, or we're thinking 100 years from now, where would our country be? Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot.
Now, Stephen, there is a well-discussed tension between the development that's happening and the neighborhoods of the city. A lot of folks in the city, in the neighborhoods parts of the city, feel like, yes, there's nice developments downtown. As you said, there's like a lot of billionaires who put a lot of money into the city, but that is not reaching the people who, as you've said and as we've all recognized, have been here for a long time, who kind of live deeper on the east side, deeper on the west side of the city. What part of that conversation I think is important to tell when it comes to telling Detroit's resurgence story?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about that question a lot because, there's part of me that for a long time was in the streets every single day, hearing people's conversations, and then in the nonprofit groups that were inside of those conversations. And in the last 5 years, the investments have just been on a whole nother level, and it's hard to keep up, first of all. To really be on the west side and the east side to hear what the specific challenges are. What I'm excited about now, and this is a 2-part answer, but what I'm excited about now is that there are people who are from those communities telling those stories, and how do we lift up those lenses? How do I get to the people with the resources and the platforms that I have to lift up and say, hey, on Fankel, we need to talk about this because it's affecting this in this way. And in my own film, I think what I'm trying to do more in just every part of my life is how do we lift up the voices that have, like we said, have been here for the past 60 years, but have been here longer than these investments, because I think the next leg up for our city is going to be unlike anything we've ever seen in the past 120 years. I think the amount of people coming from the West Coast is going to significantly increase as situations out there unfold. But of course, all of this is speculation. But the one thing that's true is that I've seen different groups come in from out of town into downtown in different areas, like TED, like, different groups that pay a lot of money to be in Detroit.
TED platform, or the
speaker platform. And when they come in, it's interesting to hear those conversations, because it's like, they're creating this table and they're inviting 1 or 2 Detroiters at the table, but not asking, hey, Detroiters, it looks like you already have a table. Like, we should come to your table instead of you coming to our table. And if we don't lift up the voices and the narratives that we have kind of gotten skipped for the past 60 years because the disinvestment has been so strong and that narrative has been so strong, if we don't go back and say, this amazing thing happened, I think we're at a crossroads where that's going to be significant or not.
There's, I wouldn't say through line, but a repeated sentiment, I think, throughout the film, that the media on the national scale gets the story wrong about Detroit often, and it has historically often. And people who work in there, yourself, myself included, who do media, have a responsibility to make sure that we're getting the story right by going to the right people. And so what you're just saying right now, to me, is that impulse, that interest to do so. I'm curious to know, have you been able to speak with folks who do express the tension there, that are maybe somewhat dissatisfied with what's been happening, and gotten that perspective on what they believe ought to be happening instead, to really tell the full story of what's happening here?
Yeah, and believe me, I tried to cram as much as I could with a connection to the city in an hour and 40 minutes. That was 20 years in the making, which is why I'm, there's definitely more films to come. But the current tensions, I see it in people that specifically, like, I don't want to call them out, but there's an artist named Dabbles on the Beat Museum, on the Grand Boulevard.
Yeah.
And there was such an effort to try and save a building that was being torn down that he didn't want torn down.
Yeah.
When other buildings were falling down in other parts of the city, like Eastern Market, that were being saved, the city chose to tear that down when it didn't really pose a risk. And at the same time, they were investing in behind his house in an alleyway. And that type of duality of like, we're trying to save this, but you're investing in this, is a significant tension. And so I think, there's all these things that are happening across our city where there's massive decisions that are affecting people who have had a specific way of life for a long time. And, there's just an interesting way to get to that point with, that allows people to like realize how important it is to have those conversations right now.
You're listening to The Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Cary Junior II. I'm speaking with Stephen McGee, and we're talking about his documentary film, Resurgo, which is about how Detroit changed over the last 20 years. Stephen, you are from outside of the city of Detroit. You came from California.
Yeah.
And so in some ways you are an outsider, though you've been here for 2 decades, both because you're not from Detroit originally and because you are white in a majority black city. And in your film, there are moments where you center kind of your story. I'm wondering why make that choice and what kind of thought processes you were going through when telling a story about the city of Detroit and wanting to use yourself and your move here as a primary theme.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for a long time, I tried to just say, how could I put a film together with all of these voices? And, there's some strong characters that I could have done, an entire 2-hour film on just by themselves, like Kali from the boxing gym, and Jessica is, of course, an incredible story. And each one of them deserves an 1.5-hour film, if not more. My own story, I just realized I was living inside of it on a daily basis. And again, I feel like Jessica and I have made films like Move Here, Move the World, and
the Amazon Pitch, right?
The Amazon Pitch, and Big Sean and I made a film before that, a year before that, that was 3 minutes. And each one of those kind of hits a different way. Big Sean and I made a film that was like, we're proud of where we're from.
Yeah.
Jessica and I made a film that was like, okay, if you move here, like you're going to move the world, but like here, I'm going to write it from this inside perspective. I think my story offered an opportunity to weave all of these stories independently because I wanted the audience north of 8 Mile, and in a lot of different ways to be invited as I was invited in. Interesting. Because I think when that happens, our region can grow and move forward. Until we realized in 1967 the city didn't die.
Yeah.
I'm also a middle child, and I want people to talk on both sides. I don't want this to, a lot of ears turn off very quickly these days. And I wanted to invite people farthest from the conversations we're having in Detroit on the daily basis to be invited in, because maybe that'll move this region. And if we can move the region forward, I think our nation has a chance. Because right now it seems like divisions happen every day in a million different conversations online. And hopefully this one, my film, will do something to heal.
Why do you think local artists like Big Sean and Jessica Care Moore chose you or wanted to work with you to do these films?
Dude, I mean, I feel every single day I'm just like, God used me in a way that is bigger than I could have ever imagined. Because to me, it's not about me. And I think that's why offering up the story I had in a way that was, it's like, here's how I got to these stories. Here's how I showed up to the table. Here's how I came, as Visit Detroit says, here's how I came to Detroit correct, and the way, I don't know why. I mean, Jessica and I worked together first in 2010 for the TEDx. In my film, I talk about it a little bit, but I was shooting these things on a daily basis, moments on the east side and the west side and the community gardens and just the things that were happening in 2010. And I didn't have any way to put that together.
Yeah.
And Jessica's voice and her poems, to me, are already internationally known, and they should be even more internationally known. But in 2010, that was like, she was like just this like beautiful like voice that connected it all on a larger picture than just saying like, oh yeah, we're starting a community garden on the West Side, you know. And Sean and I kind of connected because I had this, you know, I spent about 6 months filming in 2016. And I had a 3.5 minute film already edited, perfectly cut, just didn't have any words. And I didn't even know where the words were going to come from. Yeah. And somebody within Bedrock was like, well, I know Sean's mom, Mira, and she's beautiful. And she's, let's show it to her and see if Sean could be the voice. And then she's like, oh, that's a beautiful film. She called me and she's like, that's a beautiful film. Yeah, I'll ask Sean. And Sean said yes. I was going to interview him in person, but I just sent him a bunch of questions. And he sent me back 22 minutes of audio that was beautiful. I mean, it was incredible. And I finished that film in 2015 with a shot of my daughter picking up a camera on Belle Isle, looking at the skyline, which is the, you know, end frame of the whole film. Yeah. And at the very end of Sean's audio, there were 2 little audio marks. And if you know, like editing audio, you just look at these like waveforms, and it just said, I love you, Detroit. I love you for real. And I was like, I just started to cry because in 2016, like my daughters were born. I was like trying to figure out life, and that just like summed it up perfectly. And those types of moments are the audio I choose from, you know, that show this greater approach than I could have ever done just trying to come in with a narrative arc that I thought I should do.
I wonder where you think in your journey to making this documentary film, after moving here and being here for 20 years, you've talked to so many people, where do you think you maybe went wrong? Or what mistakes did you make regarding your interpretation of the city when you first got here? And I ask this because I want to know how you've changed over time and how the city changed you.
That's a great question. I could have worked harder. I mean, I get up at 3 a.m. and edit until 7 a.m. and get my kids to school by 8:30. So it's not a matter of more time, but I wish I would have seen narratives earlier on in 2008. But it was actually really hard to get into the Black community in 2008. Like I could become friends with people, but it wasn't until Kresge Foundation, and I mean, rightfully so, right? I mean, like nobody knows me.
I mean,
coming
in with a camera,
coming in with a camera, and all this kind of stuff. But it was like 2010 with the Kresge Foundation. I started, and me and my wife, actually 2011, started filming these artist fellows, and that's really when my understanding of just, oh, there were actually communities here that weren't run down. Like I didn't know about Harper Woods. I didn't know about LaSalle Gardens and you know, all these beautiful communities that didn't fall. And I feel like that's maybe something I should highlight a little bit more. You know, Marcia Music kind of gets into that a little bit in my film, where there's like this idea of a strong Black city that, you know, didn't ever make the news. And maybe I should shot that a little bit more. But what I am excited about is that this film is a living and breathing thing. Like literally you were the first person to see that edit. I had won Best Feature Film up in Marquette, you know, and a woman came up to me and was like, I'm 85. I was afraid of Detroit my entire life, and now I'm not. And I felt like that was a victory. Another 2 kids from the East Side were like, we never knew why there was so much grass in the city or why the houses were so far apart. I think my mom should watch this film because she's in the middle of the struggle, and this would give her hope. And then they were like, we should, every high school student in the city should see this, you know? And so all these different types of things, I'm like, I'm trying to get to the far, you know, reaches of Detroit. I'm trying to get to the far reaches of the suburbs. But then after we won that Best Feature, I spent 150 more hours over the past month editing specific sequences to try and make them stronger. Because I'm like, I need
new information,
new information. I just interviewed my mom like a few days ago about growing up in San Francisco. Cause that's a little bit part of it. And, you know, so I think where I get wrong is getting back to that, I'm going to be hearing that, and my ears are open, and however I can move forward so that whenever this goes to streaming or when a national distributor picks it up, I hope to get it right.
So it's a ever growing and changing piece right now.
Yeah. I'm already going to be editing it after I show it, but after Royal Oak, tickets just went on sale last night for Novi in Birmingham, for December 5th and December 6th. So you can just search that on their website. And the link is in my bio on my Instagram. But it's an interesting concept because Imagine Theaters was like, hey, they actually reached out. A guy from California reached out and there was like, he's like, I'm the buyer for Imagine. I'm just a dude. Like, I don't even have a budget for anything. And so I would like to have a plan to get this out to the world, but I'm also just like, God, like, how does this get out to the world?
You're putting it together while it's also flying in the air at the same time.
All of it.
You have no co-pilot.
Yeah. And I made my kids lunches this morning. Like,
Right.
like all these things are happening at the same time. And so Imagine actually was like really supportive. They're like, how do you want to do it? I'm like, well, I think we need to have these curated experiences. Like on Tuesday, on Thursday night, like I have a lot of different people coming. And I'm hoping that how this film goes out shapes and affects how investments are made, shapes and affects how people care about the East Side and the West Side. Look, I've done films that have tried to get to the people farthest from a computer in Detroit. I've done films, that are grants. I've done films that, I've given cameras to people. Like I've done everything I can with whatever I have. And this is my biggest effort for that.
I do want to get to, before we wrap up, one of the other themes or subjects in the film. You learned about the Anishinaabe people in your documentary.
Absolutely.
What is their presence like today? What have you learned through your reporting on the indigenous communities here? Yeah,
so that came from a beautiful comment on Instagram that Jessica Caremore fielded after we did maybe Move Here, Move the World. Yeah, I think so. In 2017. And somebody was like, well, why don't you have any indigenous people when she says indigenous land? Because she was, acknowledging the land, but we didn't have a shot of that. And I mean, honestly, like there's not like a, as there should never be, but there's not like a website like, hey, contact somebody, within the community.
Right.
And it took me 20 years to get into a community, or actually 19 years. And so I started talking to this awesome man named Salfi and another woman named Hadasha Greensky. And Salfi was running this thing called Vibes with the Tribes, which I think sponsors donors in the city should get behind every single year, because our city actually used to have a significant acknowledgement of this, of the Anishinaabe and indigenous communities here every year. In the 90s, we had something called the Medicine Bear Academy, which was in the historical Fort Wayne, which was ran by local indigenous people, but then the state cut the funding. We used to have a parade down Michigan Avenue, which the state cut. And so Salfi's literally out there, working daily just to have this event every year called Vibes with the Tribes, which everybody should follow on Instagram. And so I'm doing everything I can to support that, and it's also an honor to have part of his story in this film. I filmed it for the past couple of years, and so it's just an important element to say, like, we don't even have a single historical plaque across the entire city that says where the city was come from. And honestly, like, there's a lot of ways to write that, and I think it's important. But there is a museum exhibit at the DIA right now that everyone should go to because it's really beautiful.
All right, Stephen.
Sorry.
I have a ton. No, you're good. I have a ton more questions. But
we could talk for a long time.
We could talk for a long time about this film. I'm interested to see how it evolves as you get more feedback about it. But unfortunately, we're out of time. We do have to wrap up this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us here on the Metro and coming to WDET, talking about your film, being vulnerable and open to all the questions. We appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Steve McGee, filmmaker and documentarian. His film Resurgo will be playing at the Imagine Theater tomorrow in Royal Oak at 7 p.m. All right, coming up, how AI-generated music could alter the trajectory of the music industry. Stay right there. We'll be right back on the Metro.